Kennedy looked around his room to see where he had placed his most treasured asset. He checked under his bed to see if he had mistakenly thrown it there, but he couldn't find anything. That disturbed him a lot. He was still rummaging through his room until he was interrupted when his stepmother abruptly entered the room without even knocking. He was so scared of seeing her that he quickly stood up straight. "Why are you scattering everywhere like you're planning to bring the whole place down? Or do you still think this place partly belongs to you because your father said so? No, you're mistaken. My daughter and I own this place. You don't even have the slightest idea of snatching it away from us," Ariana told him wickedly. While she was saying this, Kennedy couldn't help but wonder why his stepmother was so insecure around him. He was just a 17-year-old boy, and he knew deep down within himself that he was incapable of doing the things that she accused him of. He had never even thought about claiming the house as his because he knew his father was still alive, and as long as he remained on Earth, the house would continue to be his. It had been 5 years since his biological mother died, and he missed her so much. She was the closest person to him out of his parents, so he was hurt more than even his father when his mother died from cancer. And not to deny that his father tried his best to be there for him, but he was only a teenager and needed more at that moment. For about 2 years after his mother's death, Sebastian, Kennedy's father, worked his ass off to continue providing for Kennedy's needs. He was so busy with his work that he didn't spend much time at home and couldn't perform his parental duties. This pained Sebastian so much that he felt the need to at least provide someone who would always be there for his son whenever he was unavailable because of work. He once thought about leaving his job, but he knew that it would make him go bankrupt. He didn't want that. He wanted to provide Kennedy with the best kind of life so he wouldn't feel his mother's death too much. So because of that, Sebastian decided to marry Ariana, who recently divorced her husband. Ariana had an 8-year-old girl then, Alina, and the both of them moved in together with Sebastian and Kennedy. After Sebastian does this, he feels fulfilled, like he has done the best for his son, not knowing that he did otherwise. In his presence, Ariana would always pretend as the most loving wife to him and the best stepmother to Kennedy. But this rarely happened because Sebastian was not always home. He always traveled because of his work. However, in his absence, she would completely change to a bitchy stepmother towards Kennedy. She would make sure to frustrate his life and threaten him against letting his father know. Kennedy tried to tell his father about Ariana's change in behavior, but he never got the opportunity to do that. Anytime Sebastian was at home, Ariana would always make sure that she stayed around him, not to give Kennedy the chance to snitch on her. This went on for 3 years, but things had been getting choked up for Kennedy. At first, he was okay with her verbal insults, but gradually, Ariana proceeded to insult his dead mother. Though he found that very annoying, he still decided not to talk about it because he was so scared about what she would do. However, Ariana had developed so many guts in the house that she intentionally hid what was most precious to Kennedy. "Please, where did you put it?" Kennedy asked timidly as he looked down. No matter how he felt the need to fight his battles back, he could never do it because he didn't have the will. "But what?" Ariana replied sarcastically with feigned ignorance. "The golden wristwatch that belonged to my mother. Please, where is it? I promise to always do what you want every time. Please tell me where it is." Kennedy begged her, as he was practically on his knees at that moment, while all Ariana could do was find that present moment amusing. She loved the way Kennedy was begging her. "Oh, that," she said as she twirled a lock of her hair before she continued. "I heard about something fascinating when I went grocery shopping yesterday. I heard there is an old abandoned haunted school about 2 streets away. They said ghosts are frequently in that place. So I thought of throwing the wristwatch into the house. I think that your mother might also be lurking around that house now. I wanted her to find peace, so getting that would definitely give her peace. Isn't that nice of me?" By the time Ariana finished her speech, she was laughing like a wicked witch whore. On the other hand, Kennedy was boiling with anger and hatred for her, but he knew he just had to swallow everything up. There was nothing he could do about it. "Oh, another great idea just popped into my mind again. Since you still miss your mother, how about going there to fetch the wristwatch back? I'm sure she will be so happy to see her living son. You can also have a mother-to-son talk while you're at it. I will have a mother-to-daughter talk with my girl here," Ariana completed, with another devilish laugh as she strolled majestically out of the room like she was enjoying what was happening. Immediately after she left, Kennedy slumped on the floor as he thought about his predicament. He had also heard about the haunted school. It was much worse than Ariana described it. Even people who lived around the school had to relocate because of the rampant news of ghosts lurking around the school. This began about 7 years ago when the student died there in that school. Since then, the school has been lonely, and everywhere around the school has been desolate because no one could deal with the ghosts. However, the golden wristwatch was the only thing his mother left him, so it was important to him. It was the only thing that comforted him when he had nightmares about the death of his mother. That was like the only haven he had, so he knew he had to get it back no matter what. Kennedy stood on his feet and made his way out of the house without wasting any more moments. While through all this, Ariana, sitting in the living room, gave a triumphant smile at her victory. With how notorious the haunted school was, she was sure that Kennedy would not make it back into the house again. She was happy that she got the perfect plan to eliminate him and own the home for herself and her child. Kennedy let out a deep and long sigh as he stood right in front of the haunted school. He felt so chilly as he stood in front of the desolate area. Never in 1,000 years did he think that he would be in that position at that moment. At that moment, he deliberated on going in or returning home. However, he knew he wouldn't be able to survive Ariana's maltreatment if he didn't have that wristwatch. It was like his anchor to sanity and the will to live, so he knew how important getting it back was. He finally made up his mind. He chose to go into the school no matter what. The ghosts would probably scare him. He consoled himself that they wouldn't kill him. And as he was about to enter the school, he felt a sudden rush of breeze that scared the wits out of him. He lost his balance as he tried to avoid that breeze's impact. Immediately, the breeze went down. He stumbled and looked up only to scream in horror at what he saw. He never thought he would be able to see ghosts, but he saw one at that moment. He saw a haggard-looking girl in her school uniform. She looked dirty from head to toe, and her face was extremely white. The girl stood there where she was with a crooked neck and unkempt hair. Her body was covered with scars as she stood lifelessly, like a zombie, where she was. At first, Kennedy thought she was a statue because of how stagnant that she was. She wasn't moving, and she also didn't disappear. Seeing that, he thought it was just a statue placed in the building to scare people, which made him question the thought everyone originally had about the school. Maybe it's just a myth. Maybe everything seems normal to me, Kennedy thought to himself as he tried to enter the school again. As he was about to enter again, he gave another fearful cry that seemed much louder than the first when he saw something he had previously thought to be a statue moving towards him like it was aiming for him. He forgot what he had come to the haunted place to retrieve at that point, and he took to his heels. He continued running, and he didn't know how long it was until he rammed into a hard chest, scaring himself all the more from the impact. He looked up to see who he bumped into, only for relief to flood through his body system when he saw that it was his dad. "Dad, what are you doing here?" Kennedy asked after he calmed down a bit. "I should be asking you that question. What are you doing here, Ken? I expected you to be at home and not in this desolate area. And to answer your question, my next contract is to bring down this haunted school and to reconstruct its surroundings. Now it's your turn to answer my question. What are you doing here?" Sebastian asked again, while all Kennedy could do was look down. He wanted to open up to his father, but he was too timid to do that. He didn't want to feel like he was informing on his stepmother to his father, so he looked down in confusion. "It's okay, Ken. You can tell me anything. I'm up for it," Sebastian told him as he understood the inner struggle he was having. Kennedy opened up to his father about what had been happening while he was away. He told him about how Ariana had been acting and treating him. He also told him why he was at the haunted school. By the time Kennedy was done talking, Sebastian was boiling with anger already. He didn't marry Ariana because he loved her like that. He still loved Kennedy's mother. He married her so she would cater to Kennedy's needs, but apparently Ariana saw it fit to do otherwise. Angered him so much. He thought his decision would be the best for his son, and he didn't know he was hurting him the more by doing that. He felt so bad to call himself Kennedy's father. With regret for his actions, he hugged his son tightly as they both cried. Immediately after returning home, Sebastian divorced Ariana without even listening to any form of explanation from him. His son came first, and he would always be his priority. Instead, he would find time out of his busy schedule rather than leave Kennedy in the hands of Ariana. Also, as he was bringing down the haunted school, he could retrieve his dead wife's golden wristwatch. And ever since, things fell back together for both father and son.
Applying the standard sentence, born from a humble background, is an understatement in the case of Toby, as he grew up from the specks of dirt in the gutter. The latter sentence describes better the kind of rough childhood he had. Toby, unlike other kids, wore the adulthood mantle at his tender age, as he was more empathetic and intelligent than brilliant. Although his parents were stinking poor, many times he had to skip classes to survive, as he engaged in a loud number of menial jobs. Often, these job sessions clashed with school hours, leaving him no choice but to skip school activities, since the school wasn't paying him, but rather taking from the little he was making, as there was always a new book or reading materials to buy. Toby is the first male and the third child with 2 younger siblings who are boys. In other words, he is the third among 5 children of his parents and the first son. Do you know what this formation implies? He has to commit more as the first son because he has a great responsibility on his shoulders. He might have decided to care less since he was just a teenager. Still, due to Toby's personality, he sees himself as more than his age, as he believes his position in his family makes him the second man after his father. Hence, he's saddled with the duty of providing for their basic needs, just like his father. He feels terrible when his elder sisters and younger brothers, who are always impatient, lament their parents' financial incapability and instability. He was the only one amongst them who understood the parents and believed that all fingers, although rooted in a particular hand, are not equal. The other siblings blame their parents at every opportunity they get for not being rich and financially committed like their mates. On several occasions, they had compared their father with the neighbor in the next house, Mr. Tadden, a business owner with his firm, and was assured to be living just as fine as he had a fleet of luxurious cars in his compound. It is wrong to play the compare and contrast game on Daddy. He's not lazy, and he's trying his best, was Toby's frequent defense line, but they often attacked his statement by uniformly echoing, his trying is never enough. The humiliation of his father from the children, Toby's siblings, and several other reasons, coupled together, made Toby engage in petty jobs that made him pay wages, and the majority of his earnings he spends on his siblings, which went on for years. Toby's love for tech and programming made him decide to learn the skill professionally, immediately after high school. He had gathered some funds to sign up. He was prepared. He saved up for 4 years from his street jobs and often kept the money in a secret hole known to him only. This weird method was applied after he was taught an unforgettable lesson. Do you care to know what happens before the hole saving procedure? Formerly, he used to keep his money carelessly. Maybe it was not careless, but keeping his money in a purse hanging around somewhere in his room was a bad idea in a house where his devouring siblings were living too. They often take his money, and no one ever takes responsibility for the theft. He decided to change his bank and started keeping his money in the ceiling. The outcome wasn't successful too, because this time, the money wasn't stolen, but eaten by rats. These previous experiences made him dig a secret hole, which turned out productive, as his hungry siblings never found out about the spot, and even the rats couldn't prevail. He overcame his adversaries. Toby later married Maria. They had 3 kids together and were all boys. He was living a mediocre life, but that's not what he envisioned. He wanted more from life as he didn't want to endure his father's humiliation. On a fateful day, he concluded to move to the city in search of greener pastures, having convinced his wife that for them to live the lives they dream about and to give their kids the best care, he had to go to the city to further his programming learning. The wife, naturally, disagreed, but since it was for a better life, she couldn't insist further. Toby promised to visit home at least once a month to see the wife and the kids, as they were still very young. The eldest was just 5 years old, the other 3, while the youngest was around a year senior. The city was in a different state entirely, but Toby kept to his words and visited just as they had agreed. He needed to raise some capital to build his own company when he was done learning. He had to work extra hours in the city. At some point, he became a freelancer for top-notch companies, earning well. He was able to raise something tangible. He developed and launched his first software. Things began to change positively, as he demanded the relocation of his wife and kids. After a few years, his company has kept a sound track and record. It topped as the best programming company in the city, attracting wealthy angel investors. This made Toby's company well known, with several branches across the country. In no time, Toby had become very wealthy and lived the life he had wished for with his wife. He overcame his greatest fear as he gave his children all the care and attention he didn't enjoy as a kid. He sent them to the best school in the city, paid their allowances before due time, and practically did everything a father was supposed to do for his kids. When it was time for them to start working, he established them in their individual choices of a business. He eventually became a billionaire after his company expanded to the entire continent and broke out of it. He now has a company in 53 countries. Toby became a well-respected man in his country, and his biographies were taught in schools to motivate kids that there is no limit to what they can achieve, irrespective of where they are coming from, as Toby is a living testimony. Even though Toby is successful in his niche, he never forced his business on any kids. He didn't impose his choice on them, but instead respected their decisions and gave them his full support. After about 30 years of recognition, Toby's boys had grown up and had established themselves with financial and psychological support from their father. The eldest son was an auto dealer, the second son was into real estate, and the youngest ran a successful restaurant. Everything was smooth until the unexpected happened. Toby was diagnosed with cancer and discovered he had just a few months to live. He felt terrible for himself, but worried more about his legacy when he was gone, his company. He has not had time to checkmate the boys as they grew up in wealth. Reminiscing on his memories as a lad, he concluded that his father's humiliation was purposefully because he was poor. The thought torments him by the day, and each time he thinks, a question pops up in his head. If his sons were born as poor, would they still regard and respect him, or humiliate him as his siblings did to his father? He decided to test the kids before he died. He didn't tell them about his newly discovered health situation, not even his wife. He decided to run a setback test on the boys to know if they would still love him regardless. He openly declared his company was going bankrupt due to some money he had borrowed to boost his company some years back, of which the interest had grown massively beyond his ability, so that he would be losing the company to debt. He explained to his sons that he had also mortgaged his house and was to lose his homes too. He told them he had to sell his cars to cover the remaining debt. Hence, he had no property or possessions left. He carried his board members along that all was a stunt, and he was doing it to get some fundamental rights. But they should cooperate with him and keep the truth away from the public. When it's time to unwrap the truth, he would do just that. It was challenging to convince the investors, as they complained that such a prank was deadly and would affect their heritage. But afterwards, they agreed to cooperate as long as he promised them that the stunt wouldn't last too long. His sons didn't believe in hearing it at press stations until they confronted their father and he confirmed it as accurate. They were disappointed their father didn't tell them about it, and they had to find out most embarrassingly. They left their father in anger. After a week, Toby went viral as people had different things to say about the shocking news. Some emphasized with him for his massive loss, while others abused him for taking such a stupid step, as they thought he was an intelligent businessman. He sooner appeared in his sons' respective companies, starting with the eldest to know what they still felt about him, to see if they were worthy of managing his wealth when he eventually died. He appeared like a retard searching for a job in their distinct companies, as he claimed he was now homeless. They sent him away, as they claimed he didn't involve them when he got the exorbitant loan, and rarely included him in his business when it was ranking. Thus, he shouldn't bother them, as, unlike him, they are still respectable people. The youngest son, however, was disappointed that his father didn't include them earlier until he lost all, forgave him and listened to him. He offered him a soothing job for an older man, and if he needed to learn a new skill, he would pay for the course and grant him the capital to start over once he was done learning. He will also provide him with a new house and car to drive around. He ordered that his staff serve him honorably daily and offer him whatever he asked for. He later took him home to freshen him up and change his clothes, as he looked so unkempt and rough. On the second day, Toby summoned his 3 sons for a family meeting. The eldest and second son refused to attend, as they were still cross at him. They claimed to be busy, but they gave a second thought to hearing the venue. The meeting was held in Toby's private guest house, his most luxurious house. The sons were surprised because that was one of the houses he claimed to have lost. Toby started by revealing his newly detected ailment. Then he told them he didn't lose any of his property, as he had only put them on a test to know whom amongst them genuinely cares about him and is capable of preserving his legacy when he's gone. Still, only their little brother had proven to be the qualified one by passing his little test. For that reason, even though he has forgiven the other 2, as they will remain his sons, 80% of his property shall be willed to their little brother, including his great company. In comparison, the brothers will share the remaining 20%. The brothers sobbed bitterly and asked for their father's forgiveness. After 2 weeks, Toby passed away, and his lawyer to his sons allocated his property as he demanded. The moral lesson of this story is that there's no limit to what you can attain and where you can reach, regardless of your past account or background. However, while money is good, we shouldn't love people just for their money, no matter who they are to us. A relationship is unhealthy if it's based just on money. Similarly, respect shouldn't be quantified by how much wealth someone amasses or possesses. Furthermore, it's not ideal for forsaking a friend or family during troubles or setbacks. No condition is permanent, they say, good or bad, because life is full of ups and downs. When a family or friend falls, it's our utmost responsibility to be the shoulder they can lean on by helping in whatever way we can. In some situations, money might not be the solution. They could all need words of encouragement or physical presence to get back on their feet. So when someone falls, don't make fun of their situation or detach. Instead, help them rise again. That's what a family or friend should be about. Conclusively, getting crossed at someone for not doing the needful at the right time is okay, like in the case of Toby. He didn't carry his family along on time. But then your anger shouldn't overshadow the bond and relationship you have built with someone over the years. Learn to forgive soon, just like the youngest child did. Don't hold up to someone's flaws for long, as no man is perfect. Be the reason why someone who is sad smiles again. Be the reason why someone who has fallen rises again. Be more of a strength than a weakness.
They hate me. I can see it in their eyes. They hate me, all of them, she whispered. Who hates you? He was getting impatient with her repeating the same verse repeatedly. Everyone does. They all hate me, despite everything I do. They don't like me. Why can't anyone like me? Why can't they see my strengths? The conversation he had earlier with a lady was replaying in his mind as he tried to calm down under the harmony of the relaxing music. He came to this concert to relieve himself a bit from the daily burden of his job, but he could not get rid of his exchange with one of his patients. You said you tried everything. What did you do? He asked her. She took a moment to reply and said, Nothing. I can't do anything. Sometimes I am too weak. And it seems like I don't have the physical strength, and sometimes I don't feel myself. as if they tricked me, or even worse, they hid me somewhere, from where I cannot return, no matter how hard I try. She was speaking in a trance and was annoying the hell out of her psychologist. He loved his job, but he hated weak women, and she was weak, at least according to him. I don't feel an ounce of happiness inside me. Her lips quivered as she continued, as if I have no right to be happy anymore. Maybe you need to try to be braver. Try a bit harder to feel the emotion, he replied. I am brave, and I am trying. But sometimes only trying isn't enough, is it? She wasn't looking into his eyes. Yeah, I can see that, he thought as the pencil in his hand was on the verge of splitting into two. Rolling the same pencil between his fingers, he sat down in the front row. There was an expensive-looking fancy piano at the bottom of the stage. Its pristine curved hardwood was shining under the bright chandelier. This masterpiece was indeed the center of attention of the whole theater, until someone else took its place, until she came into view. The charm of the majestic instrument began to fade as she approached the grand piano. Dressed in a knee-length white frock with her hair pinned on the top in a bun, she looked like an angel descending directly from the heavens. She ran a delicate finger across the curved body of hardwood, as if it were rare and vulnerable. He knew that this piano's heart was made from the same red spruce trees used for crafting Stradivari's violin. Yet it looked less valuable in front of the lady who was about to play it. Am I annoying you? She asked, somehow noticed his lack of interest in her conversation, and asked, No, you're not annoying me, he deliberately lied. Oh, I'm sorry. I thought I was making you bored with my non-stop chanting. She showed her concern. No, you're not. He suppressed a yawn. You are just making me angry with your weakness. Why can't you take a stand for yourself? You're not a child anymore. He could only think of that. Eden Smith was a successful psychologist who lived and practiced in Los Angeles for the past 20 years. Shayla was his patient who was going through a rough time. She annoyed him with her hopelessness. At first, he made a tremendous effort to cope with the irritation, but all in vain. Then his fury became visible in his expressions. It wasn't normal for him to loathe his patients, but he couldn't help himself in her case. According to him, Shayla was a typical fragile woman. They were not only nervous, weak, dependent, and less adapted to life, but it was also her fault. Because she had been going through hard times for the past 40 years, the psychologist believed that her weak character caused her failures in her personal life, and it was in her hand to switch these feelings. All the sessions he had with her left him more exhausted than ever, so he decided to alleviate his nerves by attending a concert. But he wasn't prepared for what life was about to unfold for him. The artist standing beside the piano turned and faced the audience. Eden felt astonished as he realized that the face he had been trying to get rid of all evening was standing in the middle of the stage. Shayla stood there, surrounded by spotlights, looking perfect in her attire. Yet she seemed feeble, or it was his imagination. She took her position behind the keys and closed her eyes as her fingers touched the cold surface. Inhaling a deep breath, she fingered through the slow-building start of Hate by Lucas King. As the composition changed, the tempo grew into a heavier and more aggressive tone. Every muscle in her body was engrossed in it. Her hips swayed, her head rocked, and her fingers did wonders on the keys. It looked like she was possessed by acoustics. He was amazed. Seeing her consumed in her music and generating a song with this perfection shocked him. He listened in fascination as beautiful music flowed from under the fluttering hands of this lady. The delightful lady he failed to judge. The majestic composition propelled her to the top note as she banged her hands along the keys. She was wrestling with the piano and testing its limit, and somehow she was pushing her limits too. Her face was mournful, her lips were compressed together, and her lush hair pinned high gave some loose strands to cover her face. She was stunning when she played the beautiful music. I have been through a lot. I think I will never reach where I want to go. She started with confusion. Where do you want to go? Failing miserably at hiding his irritation, Eden asked her. I don't know. This is the actual problem, that I don't know. Shayla shrugged her shoulders. Then who knows if not you? He asked politely. Don't know. There are a lot of places I want to visit, a lot of things, titles, awards I want to get, but I don't have the strength to walk a step towards them. The things she said earlier in the sessions made sense. He understood her better while sitting in front of the piano rather than in his office. Her music displayed her doubts, hopelessness, and misconceptions all together. Do you think I will ever get what I want? She asked with the hope of hearing yes in reply. He saw this hope in her eyes. Do you think I will achieve what I crave? Eden nodded his head in disagreement and said, No, certainly not with this attitude of yours. It is a big no. You will never be able to achieve your goals. You will never see an ounce of happiness with this attitude. He burst her bubble of hope and brought her out of her daydreaming. She remained silent for a whole minute. I kept looking at the floor. The dirt on the mat was making fun of her. And then she whispered, That was rude. Shayla nodded her head. That was rude of you to say this. I said what I saw, he defended his hate. Then you saw it wrong. I'm a little misguided now, but I know I will reach there, or I will never reach there. She was indeed trying to reach somewhere. It was evident by her restlessness. However, it was uncertain from her expression if she had reached her destination or not. She was not misguided as she claimed to be. Instead, she was not guided at all. And Eden felt ashamed of himself for not providing her with anything helpful. He scratched a finger down his whiskered throat and yanked on the collar behind his tie so he could breathe easily. He saw her as a weak woman who was depressed, unbalanced, and an infantile woman. He kept blaming her childishness, and non-seriousness for her discomfort. But he did not spend a moment understanding her essence. Eden was repenting that despite the troubles in her life, he never appreciated her strong personality. He never told her that everything would turn out to be okay. His misconception blindfolded him. He forgot that outside of his office, there is a life that this weak, thin woman somehow copes with and has been living for more than 40 years. He never thought she could give such a brilliant performance that would leave hundreds of people in complete awe. Sitting in a concert, he realized a life lesson that nobody knows anymore. Either they evaluate only what they want to see, or what is available for them to consume. He learned that in our life, we do not always look attractive, successful, or confident all the time. We possess different powers and abilities that others cannot see. People only look a little bit in the crack of their life and jump to conclusions. They get blindfolded by their rush and then repent later. And he didn't think about who she was in this life. Then the thought of getting to know her better crossed his mind and left him baffled. He didn't realize that love had happened to him. And not just any love, the kind that the French call sunstroke. It happens unexpectedly and leaves you with nothing but a burn. He suddenly felt a surge of happiness seeping inside of him at the thought, but it soon transformed into discontentment as he remembered the last words of Shayla. You never really tried to understand me, right? She asked him while looking into his eyes for the first time. What made you think that? Eden went into defensive mode and countered her with a question. You never asked me why I felt such things. I don't remember you showing interest in any of my hobbies. Not that I have many, but you should have at least inquired about them. She rested her back against the comforter and kept asking him questions he had no answers to. You said I would never reach there. Maybe you are right or maybe you are wrong. But the way you said that wasn't ethical at all. She accused him of non-professionalism, to which Eden had no answers. He knew she was right, but he didn't let his conscience take over his pride. You are wrong, he argued in a meek tone. We both know who is wrong, Mr. Smith. Thank you for your time. I will not say it was a nice meeting with you, because it wasn't, and she left. Eden replayed her last sentences repeatedly in his mind and saw her fingers easing down the keys. She was reaching the end of her music. The audience was getting ready to stand in their seats to appreciate her. They were about to stand for the woman he labeled weak and found irritating. He realized that people hold the power to reveal what they want you to see and hiding what they don't feel like sharing. They may be confused or weak at one thing and at the same time be a master of the other. He failed himself when he judged a book by its cover. He should have asked her about things that made her strong. He should have asked her what she does outside of her room. Where does she want to go? What does she want to achieve? It was the only way to know her better. It was the only way of soothing the burning sensation in his heart. And this is how fate played him. This is how karma worked. He fell in love with the woman he should have helped. I was always different than the other girls. For one thing, I was dimmed less pretty than the other girls in my school, and they always thought I was more boyish than the rest of them. Another thing, maybe the most important thing, was that I could see light when I got angry and burn everything in my path. Funny how I always seemed to do that, both literally and figuratively. Standing in front of my classmates yet again, I was listening to their taunts. I felt myself heat up. This happened every time I was angry. She's so different from the rest. She's rather ugly, isn't she? I don't think any boy would go for a girl like that. Don't make her angry, or she'll come undone. You know they call her Dragon Girl. They started laughing at this statement. Sometimes I wonder if they thought I didn't have feelings just because I had special abilities. I felt the anger coursing through me as they kept speaking and making taunts in my direction. One of the girls pushed me and I fell back, hitting me behind on the floor. I couldn't take it anymore. I got up and yelled back at them. I couldn't stop myself, and I realized it before it was too late. I had consumed everything in my path. There was a lot of damage done, Mr. Kelly, I heard an officer say to someone standing beside me. I was covered with a towel as the siren sounded, and the firefighters filled surroundings around me. I heard my father grunt beside me, shaking his head in shame. His daughter had done it again, bringing dishonor to the family. He and my mother had always tried to change me, to make me a better person, but it never turned out the way they wanted it to. And who could blame them? I was the one that couldn't control my powers, not them. We're so sorry for the damage, I heard him say to the fireman beside him. Rest assured, we will pay for everything, and a generous donation will go to the school. Help everyone recover. He said the last bit quietly, and I knew what he meant. It was a bribe to keep their mouths shut. He didn't want anyone to find out about this. It would be bad for my father. He was one of the most prestigious businessmen in town. This wouldn't be good publicity for him. He shook hands with the man while I kept my head down, afraid to look into his disappointed face, because I knew he wore that expression as he spoke. It's time to go home, he said stiffly, placing a hand on my shoulder to direct me towards his car, parked not far away from the school's grounds. Your mother will be so disappointed, Grace. I winced. Using my middle name was always a way of communicating the disdain my parents sometimes felt for me. It always made me shiver. It meant things had gone terribly. I walked towards the passenger side of the car. I could feel the eyes looking at me intently. It was always unnerving because it never helped that I had crippling anxiety. I got into the car as quickly as possible, staring out of the window beside me. Luckily, the car was parked across the street from the school, and I didn't have to look at the school from my side of the vehicle. My dad got in and started the ignition, and his large form slumped down a bit when the car began to move away from the school. I knew he would say something soon, so I had to brace myself for it, but there was only silence, at least for a while. When we had gotten reasonably far from the school, he cleared his throat and slowed the sedan into the traffic in front of us. You know we always try our best to help you, but, he said with a defeated sigh as he turned to look at my face. I tried to turn away, but my father always felt some way about looking away from him when he spoke. I didn't have a choice but to look at him. But it's hard to take care of someone like you. He looked away, focusing on the road before him. I, on the other hand, turned to face the window again. I felt tears leak from my face furiously. It would always be like this. I would always be a freak. I was going to be someone like you to everyone around me. I didn't ask for these abilities. Sometimes I wish they would go away. But like everything that happens just before you go to bed, it's real and stays. You only get that moment you're sleeping to wish it away. But as soon as your eyes open, you'll be faced with the cruel truth. This was my cruel truth. "I'm sorry," I whispered as I cried silently, hoping he didn't notice I was crying. I was probably unaware that we had already gotten home, but I realized it quickly once the car door swung open and I came face to face with my mother. She stood, tall and proud, just like her husband. I always felt a stark contrast between her and me when I stood beside her. She was elegant, a sophisticated woman that everyone looked up to, and I, on the other hand, was rough and always getting into trouble. I wasn't elegant. Hovering over me with my father next to her, my mother seized me up and shook her head furiously. "How many times would this happen?" she boomed, her voice holding the anger I had just let go of a couple of hours ago. Funny, that always seemed to be the only thing we had in common. "It's not my fault, Mom," I said. "They were teasing me." What have I said about that? I let out a sigh and repeated the words she had constantly drummed into my ears. I should always report to a teacher around me. "And did you do that?" she asked. I already knew where this was heading. "They don't understand, Mom," I said, a little bit irritated. "No one does." "Well, you have to stop acting like a brat, and then maybe someone will pay you to heed." "You're an awful person," found myself saying. My feet seemed to work on their own too. I found myself running out of the yard and into the streets beyond. My parents' cries for me to come back were lost in the sea of thoughts swimming in my head. I walked a long distance, taking a detour into the park, far from home, when I felt the need to stop and finally let it all out. I screamed as loud as I could into the empty park and finally cried, the tears falling nonstop. The sky seemed to call with me. There was a rumble and then a sudden downpour, sending me running for shelter under one of the oak trees. I huddled up, crying my eyes out. Why me? Why are all these things happening to me? I felt a presence next to me and quickly lifted my head. Well, 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 if it isn't Miss Dragon Girl. A girl taunted me as she walked towards me. It was one of the teasers from my school that my blast hadn't injured. She came forward and a group of girls followed after. I don't want any trouble, I quivered, backing further into the tree. I didn't want to start anything with these girls. "We know," she replied. "Get her, girls." It happened at once, and before I knew it, the girls were all over me. They were kicking and hitting me as I lay immobile on the ground. I felt the anger in me rise, and my body began to heat up. As the beatings became more intense, then I realized I couldn't attack. This is what my mother had yelled about, what my parents had been talking about. There was no teacher to report to, but I had to stay in check, so I laid quietly, the pain increasing with each blow I was given. The girls began to laugh, and their leader said, "That's enough for today. She'll think twice about showing her ugly face around here ever again." The rain came down twice as hard as I laid bloody on the ground, the water washing over me. I kept thinking maybe this was it. I'd go into the light and never be bothered again, or perhaps they'd have to bother again. I felt the presence next to me. I didn't bother to look this time. I was sure it was one of the girls, back to do their dirty bidding. "Why are you on the floor?" a male voice called out. "Are you crying, or is it just the rain?" I didn't know who it was, but I didn't want anyone to see me in this state as I cried miserably. "Please leave me alone. They've already done their part," I yelled, but he chuckled. "You need a helping hand." He put his hand on mine, and I realized they were so warm. It was almost as if he had pulled them out of an oven. I looked up at his face and gasped. You're a dragon," I exclaimed. He laughed again, lifting me off the ground. He put his hands on my wounds, and I began to feel the pain go away. "You're a smart one, aren't you?" he said over the loud sounds of water hitting the ground. "Let's get you somewhere dry." In an instant, the rain stopped. I looked around us, and it was still raining, but it wasn't coming anywhere near us. It just fell around us. I marveled at this, forgetting the incidents that had just occurred. I had never seen magic up this close. "I've been watching you," he said. "You're special." "I'm not. I'm a freak," I replied, turning away from him to face the park around me. My eyes were still focused on the rain. "You're not a freak, if that's what you're trying to tell me." "I am," I said, a little bit annoyed as I began to heat up again. I hated that no one could understand me. I didn't realize it, but I was releasing smoke, and I let out a little roar, and fire erupted from my hands. "See? This is what I'm talking about," I yelled, the fire growing in my hands. "I'm a freak. I'm the dragon girl who can't keep herself in check." He stared at me for a while, contemplating something, then walked towards me, placing a hand on my shoulders. "Maybe you're different and can't keep yourself in check, but you're not a freak, Grace. You need somebody that understands you." He turned towards the sky and let out a roar, fire flowing out of his mouth into the clouds above. "Come on, you give it a try," he urged. "You've got marvelous fire techniques." I let out a little awkward laugh. No one had ever said that to me before. I let out a roar and fire erupted. He continued to laugh as he rose to the air. I knew what was happening. He was transforming into a full dragon. I looked away. You weren't supposed to look at them when they transformed. After a bright light flashed, I knew he had changed. "You're not so different, you know," he said again. "I'm always here." It was the 17th of July, just past 7 p.m. Andy was devastated. His mother, Pauline, had just broken the unfortunate news that his father had left her for someone else sexier. This meant that she no longer had a husband, and that more importantly to poor Andy, he no longer had a father. Throughout the rest of July, he struggled with depression and came extremely close to giving up. The realization that he had lost the father figure that had always been exceptionally important to him was finally kicking in. All those fond memories of their time together suddenly flooded him. That one time they were fishing, Andy fell in the lake because the fish overpowered him. Thrashing at football, and all those times his father came home drunk and became violent. In Andy's mind, these drunken fits of rage were always brushed off as occasional outbursts because of a stress-filled life. Due to his autism, Andy was vastly intelligent, and while he rightly took his autism in stride and correctly viewed it as a strength rather than a weakness, it had always led to two significant problems. The first was not being able to pick up on certain things, which is why he never realized until now that his father was a violent and selfish man. Secondly, he suffered from social anxiety, and difficulty with making friends plagued him. He admired many people and shared similar interests, but ultimately struggled to connect with them because of how shy and overwhelmed he could suddenly get. As a result of this, he was hit even harder by his father's actions, as he had no friends to rely on and be comforted by. Andy's mother, Pauline, was aware of this, and despite her being upset, she bought Andy an invaluable gift to try and comfort him in any way possible: a laptop. Her reasoning was not only to ensure that Andy had something to occupy his time and prevent boredom, but it was also a new way for him to find friends and socialize online. She hoped communicating online would help him feel less shy when approaching people, and it seemed to initially take away the immense pain he was experiencing, which was great. He quickly created an Instagram, Facebook, and Discord page to meet new people. All was seemingly swimmingly, but people began to laugh at him and send hateful messages because of who he was. Andy had never owned a laptop before, so he didn't know what he was doing. This led to situations like him messaging his mother, but accidentally sending these messages into open posts and public forums, leading to humiliation. Things worsened when he told these people about his new idea for a fledgling startup project. "You'll never achieve anything, you absolute fucking cretin. Not in a trillion years. Might as well quit while you're ahead. It saves you wasting your time and us laughing when you fail." These horrible, offensive, spiteful insults were hurled at Andy, shaking him to his core. This deeply affected Andy so much. As a result, he ended up spending August in isolation. However, this could benefit him as it provided vital time to work on something. Fueled by the anguish that he still felt because of his father, he worked hard on creating a program to simulate human behavior. Why did he do this? He wanted to ensure that in the future he wouldn't have to suffer from bullying or missing a cue, because using his program, getting to know people and reading their emotions and thoughts would be a lot easier. December 1st rolled around, and Andy was starting to communicate with more and more people. He took the newfound knowledge from previous experiences with people online, and now made sure to send his mom messages more privately. He tried to find interests in people similar to his, and created engaging and meaningful conversations out of them. He noted these topics of interest and other aspects of the individuals, and put them into his algorithm. Based on the results, he'd know whether they were compatible with him, which was reassuring. To the shock of Andy and Pauline, the program had grown rapidly in popularity over the past few months, and Andy became rich and famous as a result of this just within a few months. His dad caught wind of this and wanted to become a part of their lives again, but they weren't gullible or stupid. Far from it, in fact. Ironically, Pauline ran her husband through the algorithm, and even it determined that he was completely unreliable. Andy's father tried his best to worm his way back in, but Pauline and Andy were fed up with these desperate and pitiful cries, so they moved away to a new address so they would no longer need to be disturbed. The flights were booked, and Edinburgh, Scotland, was set firmly in their sights. The most exciting aspect of this was similar for Andy and his mother. Andy had a friend called Levi on Discord and lived in Berwick upon Tweed, which is quite close, whereas his mom had a handsome man named Rodriguez. While managing the algorithm for company, Andy, he just so happened to live in Edinburgh again. It was now mid-December and everything was great. Andy and his mom were living thanks to the immense success of the program comfortably. Although it was a cold December's Eve, Andy felt like shopping and exploring Edinburgh, which was still relatively unfamiliar to him. It was a frigid night, the city barren and ominous. As the snow began to fall and the trees glistened, he was starstruck. An excellent sight was gracing his eyes. Among the trees was a little gift shop with intriguing and aesthetically appealing lights illuminating its exterior. He was so intrigued by these lights that he strolled up to the shop and looked into the front window. It turned out to be a pawn shop. Andy had been looking for Christmas gifts, so he thought it'd be at least worth a punt to browse this shop. Knocking the door several times, he noticed a slight, frail silhouette slowly making its way to the door. "How can I help you, young man?" passionately spoke the elderly gentleman. Andy explained he was looking for a nice Christmas gift. The gentleman led him to the technology section and the assortment of phones. He had amassed quite a collection of brand new phones. "I'll take a few, kind sir." He smiled at the gentleman, as he knew what he would ask next. "How many is a few, young man?" Andy continued to smile, thinking of the happiness that this would bring. 173, please." A few days later, and it was the 26th of December, 2018. Christmas had come and gone. Pauline had met a new man called Dan while he was working as their business manager. He proposed to her on Christmas Day. While Andy was initially quite skeptical, he passed the reliability test, the only evidence needed to prove that Dan was perfect for Pauline. Being in such a positive mood, due to the thought of him and his mom finally being truly happy again, he started to wrap up the 173 iPhones. As bizarre as it sounds, this number wasn't random. Andy had noted every person that previously said kind things, stuck up for him, and was overall a good friend to him. Now that he was living comfortably, successfully, he wanted to spread a little Christmas cheer and give something back to the people who genuinely cared. Luckily, the iPhone boxes were only so small that he could fit all 173 into his mom's car boot, and they drove to the post office together. They were all sent off to be delivered to multiple addresses. To show this appreciation for his true friends, he wrote a heartwarming message on the back of each of the 173 parcels. It read, "To my best friend from the unknown, I hope this gift brings you some happiness. If so, I will be happy." He originally intended for the parcel to be anonymous, Giving back was all that mattered to him personally. Them knowing about it was irrelevant. Unfortunately, though, Andy forgot to tell the post office this while providing the iPhone cases. Ultimately, his name and address were unintentionally plastered on the back of the parcels. It was now New Year's Day. Andy, his mother, and his new stepfather, Terry. He had just booked his holiday from work. A client was asking for numbers and book for his business accounts to be sorted out, but it was New Year's Day, and all that mattered to him was family. They were chatting amongst themselves until a knock at the door. They lived in rural Scotland. They had to drive 30 miles to reach the nearest post office, so a knock at the door, it wasn't heard of. Terry got up, curious as to who it was on the other side of the door. It was a courier with a parcel. It was from one of the addresses Andy sent an iPhone. It turned out to be the same package, unopened. Somehow the note had managed to stay firmly attached. It said, "Andy, you left your address visible, you donut. Thanks for the sweet message, though I don't want an iPhone. Being your friend is all I need. Love, Davina. P.S. I live nearby. Meet me at the old Hitchington Lake on the 5th of January at noon." He boarded the bus around 1 p.m., chilled and ready to meet Davina. As the bus drove, he noticed small cottages, a barrage of wildlife, and a surprisingly dry Scottish day. He loved the atmosphere, mainly striking ambience that was somewhat comforting. The bus arrived at 1:30, which was good, as he wanted to practice his social skills and be prepared. Standing by the river, he noticed a partially broken swing. Usually he would stay clear of this, but he needed the confidence to speak to Davina, so he decided to live a little. It was fun at first, but then the rope dwindled, and within seconds it snapped, and he fell directly into the lake. When the fishing incident happened with his dad, he was okay, because he was with someone, but this time he was on his own. And swimming to safety wasn't an option, because he didn't know how to. It all seemed over, and just as he started to flail and struggle, a faint voice was audible. Suddenly, a young girl of a similar age to Andy dived into the river and grabbed him. She guided him out of the water and saved him. He was shaken, but he was still alive. "You saved me." "Andy, I told you to meet me by the river, not in the river." As if it were destiny, Davina and Andy quickly grew to like each other. Love at first sight. Andy endured a challenging year, but he had gained a new family against all of the seemingly impossible odds. Not one new addition, but two.